This is Dr. Sezin Zengin. Today we are together with Dr. Souvik Banerjee from the Management Development Institute of Murshidabad, India. He is the Assistant Professor of Economics and Finance. Very welcome, Professor.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Today we will be talking about the Asia's role in 21st century world economics. It's a very interesting topic. So, let's start talking about the recent development and recent issues in Asia.
Okay. Basically, Asia, world over the commentators, academicians, policymakers, they are increasingly looking at Asia as the future of the growth engine, world growth engine. Simply because Asia is now home to close to 5 billion people, and that is almost half of humanity. So, half of humanity is living in Asia, and if you see the geographical span of Asia, geographically it is all the way from Japan to Turkey, and south up even New Zealand and Australia. Some people call it extended Asia, and most part of Russia is also part of Asia. And China, most people are talking about China. But apart from China, China is already the biggest economy in the world in terms of PPP. So, it is a $2.1 trillion economy, and India is the third largest in the world. It is a $8.1 trillion economy in PPP terms. But apart from these two, there are countries in Southeast Asia, smaller countries, say Vietnam, phenomenal growth, right, Philippines. So, there are pockets of high growth.
And this growth take place after 1980s, it's very recent growth, right?
Yes, especially 1979 was the year when China opened its doors for this private capital, right, and that is now 40 years. Now 1991 was the time when India opened up. India, the famous liberalization, privatization and the globalization, we call it LPG in India. So, through that process, now close to 28 years for India's this opening up of the economy. And one small statistics if I can give you, in 1991 the Chinese economy was at $362 billion in absolute terms, and Indian economy was at $359 billion. Today, absolute terms, China is 11 trillion and PPP terms 21 trillion. India is at 2.7 trillion absolute terms, and PPP terms 8.1 trillion. So, you can see the phenomenal growth from a $350 billion, $360 billion economy. They have become so large in a span of say 28 years, 91 to 2019.
Okay, what are the main driving forces of the economy in Asia?
The predominant driving force is the huge population. Because China and India together is close to 300 billion people, and so that is an youthful population. The working age population in China and India, because they are the drivers of growth, the manpower, huge manpower, and they in turn become the market. So
create demand in the market.
Yes, they create the demand in the market. So Western companies, they started manufacturing in Asia. They started manufacturing with Taiwan and South Korea first in 1970s, and then gradually the value chain moved to China, because China the manpower cost was lower than say Taiwan or South Korea, all these countries, Singapore. Then because of this low cost labor cost, huge number of jobs were created, and they became in turn the market because of the rising incomes. Similarly, in India, what happened? India somehow missed the manufacturing bus. How China developed, they catch the manufacturing bus and became the factory of the world. Similarly, India became the back office of the world. After the internet revolution of 1990s, increasingly the Western companies started outsourcing from India, and the trend continues. So, you name any tech biggies in the world, in the Western world, all have huge operations in India.
Yes, what do you think about the Asian companies' future role in the world's economy?
Okay, if I give some statistics, say now Fortune 500 companies, the biggest conglomerates in the world, 210 companies as of last Fortune 500 list are from Asia, right. So 129 if we include the Taiwan companies also in China. So 129 companies are from China itself, 119 from mainland China, 10 from Taiwan. So this is the first time in post Second World War period that more companies are from any other country than US. US have close to 120, 121 companies. So the first time in the history after 1945 that more companies are from any other country other than the US. And and in top 20 you will find some Japanese companies as well. So if we take any events for example Soccer World Cup in Russia, last Soccer World Cup, it was dominated by Chinese companies. The major sponsors were Chinese companies. So anecdotal evidence shows that these Asian companies are playing very big role. One sports we play a lot, cricket. Now cricket, the epicenter of cricket is India. All big brands which is supporting the money, actual money is flowing from India.
Okay. So there is the future, and you believe that the 21st century can be the time for like Asian century.
Yes, definitely, because McKinsey Global Institutes, their projection is by 2050, 50% of the world GDP will be from Asia. It's already 40%. So when 50% of the global GDP is coming from one continent, they are definitely the drivers of the world. And coupled with that, what is also important is most of the countries in the West are facing a demographic challenge. Their population is not growing fast enough, but that challenge is not there barring few countries in Asia. South Korea, Singapore, these countries may face some sort of demographic challenge. Otherwise, population growth is still not an issue in Asia.
Okay, what are the other major challenges for Asia in this case?
Other major challenges are political instability in certain geographies, then regional conflicts, and also certain countries when they change their regimes. So faster growing economy may become quite less attractive destination for capital, and they become much less, means the growth rate may become much less. So there are certain countries which are facing these challenges. I don't want to name certain countries, but
okay, all right. Let me ask about an international trade. Everybody knows that Asia holds the most export power of the world, but what about the future of international trade for Asia?
International, as I said, that China became the factory of the world from 1980s at least, 1980s, 90s, that become more profound in 1990s. But now what's happening, because of rising wages, and China also implemented one-child policy in late 70s. So the manpower which is joining the labor force is got reduced. Recently China repealed that one-child policy. Now because of that and because of more jobs available in the market, the manpower cost became higher, although not comparable to the West, but still it grown manifold from 1980. Now because of that, now investors are looking for alternatives. And I can give you an example, say Vietnam. Vietnam is a small country in Southeast Asia, but increasingly Vietnam is a very attractive destination for FDIs, foreign direct investment, and thus companies are setting up base there, manufacturing there, and from there they are exporting.
Because of the low labor cost.
Low labor cost. So the labor cost in Vietnam, for example, is 1/3 of hinterland China, and 2/3 of this coastal China, because coastal China the labor cost is higher. So Samsung, companies like Samsung, they have the second largest manufacturing facility outside South Korea in Vietnam, and they developed the entire road network around their factory to ship their own goods.
Okay, what about the agreements among Asian countries? Do they have like different collaboration than the World Trade Organization? Are they kind of establishing their own trade or commercial organization?
Yes, there is Southeast Asia, there is ASEAN Accord is there, right? Similarly in South Asia we have SAFTA, South Asian Free Trade Agreement. So, and also there are free trade agreement between two countries, country to country basis. So, there are trading blocks, there are free trade agreement among the countries, two countries, and also there is increasingly evidence of supply chain among the these Asian countries. If we give one small statistic that 1990s, there were 20% of the global export happening from Asia. Now the number is 33%, 33-34%. But the Asian export to outside Asia region is still around 20-21%. So rest 12-13% is happening between the Asian partners. So Asian partners are trading increasingly among themselves. So that's why some commentators say this is the Asianization of the economies. Some people say that 19th century was the Europeanization, 20th century was the Americanization, and now what is happening is the Asianization.
All right, that's great. And let me ask you one other question regarding the foreign trade. How the currency change or currency affects, like the currency level of the Asian countries against US dollar or euro? How US dollar and euro affects the international trade for Asian countries?
Most of the countries, barring China, most of the countries have free float currency. So since the inflation level in these countries is much more than this European or America, so their currencies are getting devalued. Okay, but at the same time that is keeping their export competitiveness. Okay, so but there are instances, especially in late 1990s, there was a currency crisis. There was a currency crisis across Indonesia and Thailand, right? They faced a lot of challenges, even South Korea, Malaysia. But after that, fortunately, Asian countries are not facing much of a currency crisis. And one of the reason why this happened, because they in a sense decoupled from the Western and the American economy, American and the European economy. As I told earlier, they are now more trading among themselves. So that is becoming a cushion. So they are not less dependent on America. But although the trading is actually taking place through dollar, but they are trading among themselves. So
that's a different process.
Yes.
All right, let me ask you how Asian countries affected by the 2008 crisis in the United States?
Yes, so as I already discussed, taking their lesson from 1998 crisis, they managed 2008 crisis relatively well, much well. There were very few, you can say setbacks, but yes, export to the Western countries suffered. I can say that, say for example, India, their export service, India is an export powerhouse in service sector, and those service companies suffered, but for a short span of time, and they bounced back. So 2008 was not really a major, was not having a major impact on Asian economies.
Also in the financial sector, right?
Yes.
Financial sector was the least affected. So there was turbulence for 1 year, 1 or 2 years, but after that they bounced back. So say for example, if I say about my country, India, now the equity markets are almost at the historical high levels. So China is also doing quite well, because as our own consumption is growing. For example, China, their proportion of export to GDP is considerably coming lower and lower. So that means they are consuming themselves. They from a export oriented economy, only export oriented economy, they are becoming a consumer economy. So when they have self-sufficient demands in the internal markets, although yes, they are still to some extent dependent on export, there is a component of the economy which is dependent on export, but that is not the only growth driver. For example, India is the third largest economy in the Asia in absolute terms, and PPP terms second largest. India is the least, you can say, least dependent on export among the major economies. The export proportion is much lower. Okay, the countries, the domestic
economy, domestic economy is the primary driver. So unlike the 1970s, when Asian tigers became big enough through predominantly through export oriented growth model.
Okay, one last question. How do you see the future of Asia beyond the 21st century, let's say?
Can you just repeat your question?
How do you see the future of Asian countries?
Asian countries, yes. Future of Asian countries, Asia is probably going to dominate the 21st century. As I said, that 19th century was the European century, 20th century was the American century. I do believe that 21st century belongs to Asia, it's the Asian century, because most of the demographic factors, internal demands, and how geopolitics is playing out, there is no reason why Asia will gain its rightful place. If I give just one example, throughout the recorded history, India and China were the two biggest economies in the world, even up to 17th century, before the European colonial powers colonized much of Asia. So probably in 5,000 years of written history, India and China were the two biggest players, and there is no reason in my mind that why 21st century will give these two great nations again their own places under the sun.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to interview you.
It's my pleasure, ma'am. Thank you.
Today we were together with Dr. Banerjee, and it was a great conversation regarding to Asia's economy in 21st century.